Hello, my name is Leslie Winnick, Director of Alumni and Student Class Outreach at the Stanford Alumni Association. I would like to personally welcome you to the 2016 Classes Without Quizzes series from Reunion Homecoming, a sequence of faculty-led talks designed to reconnect alumni with Stanford. This segment features Professor Jamshid Ghajar's Fog of Concussion talk. Jamshid Ghajar is a clinical professor of neurosurgery, director of the Stanford Concussion and Brain Performance Center, and president of the Brain Trauma Foundation. A leading scholar of concussion research and treatment, he co-founded the Brain Trauma Foundation with the goal of improving outcomes for traumatic brain injury sufferers. Enjoy the talk. We're so glad you could tune in.
So I'm going to give a talk on, it's called the Fog of Concussion, because it really is a fog in terms of the people who have a concussion feel like they're in a fog, and the people diagnosing them are in a fog too, in terms of what are the diagnostic criteria, what is a concussion. And I bring you up to date with what's going on in terms of the newest research, but I want to make it more, it's a small group, let's make it interactive. As I talk, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. It sort of breaks it up a little bit. I've got lots of slides, lots of things to cover, but I'd like to have more of an interactive lecture. So happy, if you got I'm talking about something, wait a minute, what about this? Put your hand up, we'll answer it. Go back and forth. We don't get through the slides, it's fine, as long as you get some gestalt. And what I want you to come away with is, so the less you know, the more certain you are, right? So, and the more you know, the less certain you are. So it's the same with concussion. The less you know about it, the more certain you are. Oh, somebody, see a football player and they got hit. Oh, that person had a concussion. They're going to get demented, and that's it. Very clean cut. You start getting into details, it starts getting a little bit murky. And the big murky part is we haven't defined concussion. So here you have a situation where people are saying concussion's bad for you, multiple concussions are bad, subconcussion. So it's unknown, now we got sub-unknown. Lots of those are bad. And we haven't defined the condition. So I was in a situation, so as a neurosurgeon, I take care of severe traumatic brain injury. So there's a spectrum of traumatic brain injury. It goes from, and unfortunately we called it mild for people who come in the emergency room that are awake after a head injury. It could be from a car accident, could be from a fall, sporting, biking, whatever. But if they're awake, we call that mild because they're awake. If they're in coma, we call that severe. So it's basically mild, moderate, and severe is based upon how awake you are. So if you're awake, you get a mild. And if you're sleepy, you get a moderate, and if you're in coma, you get severe. And so, as a neurosurgeon, we concentrate on the severe ones. The ones that are in coma, a lot of them have blood clots in their brain. We have to take them out. They have the brain swells a lot. We take the skull off. We monitor the brain pressure. There's a lot of things we do, and that's my DNA. That's what I trained for. I started the Brain Trauma Foundation when I was a resident. And those guidelines are used all over the United States, in fact, internationally. So when you get in a car accident and the ambulance comes, they use the Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines to give you best care, both at the ambulance and also in the hospital. And those guidelines have led to a 50% drop in deaths. So when I was a resident in training, you get a young kid coming in a car accident coma, it was 50-50 chance they would live. They would 50 chance they would die, 50% chance they would die, live. And now it's 15%. So only 15% die, 85% live. So that's what it's done. And a lot of it is making sure in the ambulance you get a lot of fluids, that they monitor your oxygen, and then in the hospital they monitor your brain pressure and try and keep it down. So that's where my DNA is. And concussion or mild traumatic brain injury was, well, get a CAT scan when they come to the emergency room. If you don't see any blood, they go home. No one ever thought that there would be any problems in these people. And in fact, they have a lot of problems. They have problems with their attention, with balance, and they get other injuries. They have problems with their memory. And so that led, and then what happened was we had the war in Iraq, soldiers coming back that had problems depression, lack of focus, and so on. And that led to then the NFL, and then suddenly when it hits the NFL, then everyone pays attention to it. So now it's like going into the ocean and getting a shark attack, right? So it's like you're seeing Jaws, and now you're not going to go into the ocean anymore because you think you get a shark attack. So it's actually very much on everybody's mind. Concussion is really on everyone's mind, and it's getting into not only the NFL, but now it's in people that are abused, people that kids that are in playgrounds. I mean, it's rampant. So if you look at head injury, and they did a survey of American households, and 25% of people said that they had a concussion. So I'm sure in this audience, you all know somebody who had a concussion, and maybe you had a concussion at some point. So it's extremely prevalent. The question is, what is it? What do you have to watch out for? And what are the long-term consequences? And that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is the Stanford Concussion and Brain Performance Center. I'm the director of that. I came here 2 years ago to start it. And it's in neurosurgery, but also with sports medicine. So this is the Stanford Neuroscience Health Center that was just built over on Quarry, and we see all the neurology and neurosurgery patients here, and the concussion patients are seen here as well. The basement's got all the imaging, MRI, PET scans, and all that. It's a full neuroscience clinic, and so people from around the country come in, people in car accidents in Palo Alto, all the way from students on the East Coast, come to the concussion clinic here and see me and the other people on our team. And we have a special way of handling people, which I'll get into. I also have an office in sports medicine, so I see all the athletes who have concussions, and we have a very strict way of monitoring the athletes in terms of return to sports, but also return to school. Return to school is more important than return to athletic activity. We spend a lot of time making sure that the students can focus on their work, and if they can't focus because of a concussion, we give them accommodation, give them more time. So these are two places we see most of them. We're funded by Department of Defense. I'll tell you about some of the projects we're doing with them. And we're also very connected with orthopedic, sports medicine, neurosurgery, neurology, and radiology. So it's an interdisciplinary effort in taking care of these athletes. Just for conflict, so I am funded by the military on two big projects. One is Eye Track Advance, which is an eye tracking diagnostic for concussion. And this company, SyncThink, makes this device that's FDA approved that we're using here in the sidelines of all the Stanford football games and for the athletes in general. All the athletes get eye tracking as part of their baseline testing. I'll get into that, but just for conflict, I am on the board of SyncThink, but there are other eye tracking companies as well. These two projects funded by the military, this one's involved, BTEC is funded from the military to define concussion and to come up with diagnostic criteria for the full spectrum of traumatic brain injury, and that one I just spoke about. So, okay, so here's the lineup, and we don't have to go through everything, but I wanted to sort of generally give you coverage. What's the prevalence of concussion? What are the biomechanics? How do you get it? What are the new advances? We talk a little bit about MRI and things like that. What is the current definition, or what are we heading for? The sideline assessment at Stanford, what do we do there for the football games or water polo or baseball or volleyball? I think everyone thinks concussions only occur in football. Actually, the number one sport for the first concussion is wrestling. So, and I see sailors at Stanford with concussions. So, and the swimming team. So don't think that it's just football. Every sport has got concussion. Any chance of getting hit, or I mean, swimming, you'd think you wouldn't get a concussion. Soccer, big one. And it's not heading the ball. It's actually colliding with other players. So a lot of people think that it's just heading the ball. Actually, when you hit the ball, you tense your neck and is less likely to get concussions. We'll talk about how you get a concussion. So don't think it's just football. And then we're going to talk about, my favorite subject is how you pay attention, called the predictive brain state, and how that's disrupted in concussion, and how we can use eye tracking to pick that up. So prevalence, okay, so here we are. How many concussions were there before 2006 in traumatic brain injury? So here's the emergency room visits for head injury, and it was pretty flat. Then suddenly started going up around 2007. This is almost like autism diagnosis. And a lot of it is, it was always there. It's a question of how you define it and public awareness about it. So I think a lot of this is not because we suddenly had an increase in number of concussions, but we actually became more aware of it. And also there were a lot of state laws saying that you can't go back and play unless you're cleared by a physician. So a lot of kids go to the emergency room or their physician and say, I have a headache, and the physician would have to clear them before they can go back into play. So a lot of this is driven by state laws and by awareness. So as a consequence of the whole concussion awareness, the number of people playing football or volunteering to play football is decreasing. So it's kind of like, I don't want my kid to play football, but I love watching other people's kids play football. So it's kind of like, that's what these stats are going for. It seems like lacrosse is going up, other sports. I think people don't realize that concussions can occur in any sports, just not football. One of the concerns, though, is really that kids in general are spending less time doing physical activity. And we see this here as increasing rates of kids that are not involved in activity. And a lot of it is because of technology, video games and so on, which may improve your brain power but don't improve your muscles. So this is a concern as well. So people want to encourage physical activity in kids, but also protect against concussion. So the prevalence, this is on the front cover of Time magazine a couple of years ago, but about 17 kids die a year of head injury and playing football, and well, it's not clear exactly if it's just from head injury. So cardiac effects, dehydration, heat stroke, and so on. And so this really has driven a lot of people to think about concussion being, if you don't take somebody out, they could die. And it comes also from research on second impact syndrome. So this was a rat experiment. We took rats, banged them on the head, and then you wait 2 weeks, bang them again. It's like they had, they recovered and then they just got another head injury. But if you do it within the week, the brain swells a lot more. And so the thinking was these 17 kids are dying because they had a concussion before, they were put back in, and they got hit again, the brain suddenly swelled and they died. And if you think about it like that, it doesn't make sense because there are millions of kids playing football, millions of getting a repetitive head injury. Why only 17 die? So these kids, the ones that have brain swelling and blood clots have an enormous shear injury of their head. So it's a mechanism that's producing it. But I do think the second impact syndrome is important in that people that have concussion don't pay attention and their balance is off. So they should not be put back into play because they'll get another injury, any injury, head injury, ankle injury, knee injury, and so on. But it doesn't mean that they can't exercise. So this is what's happened. A lot of kids who have had a concussion are told to rest. The thinking is the brain's on fire. We should let it cool down. Don't look at iPads. Don't exercise. Wait for everything to go away. Then you can go back in. And what you have is huge numbers of kids that are depressed, anxious, chronic fatigue, sleep problems because they're not exercising. There's no evidence that, and I'll get into this, that exercise is bad for the brain. In fact, there's evidence now that exercise promotes recovery. So at Stanford, all the football players that get concussions, or the volleyball players, or the soccer players, they get put on a treadmill on day one. And we haven't had a brain explode yet. This is all out of second impact syndrome. So it's the fear that, and it came from experiments that, so if you had a concussion and you have this period of time where the brain, and this is the thing, the brain is on fire. It's like really prone to getting another injury. And then if they do work, the brain injury will increase and get worse. Or if they do exercise. And if you look at we're just about to publish an analysis of all the articles on brain rest and exercise showing that there's no evidence that they actually make things worse. In fact, they actually promote recovery. So what happens is in people that can't pay attention, if you have them read something, they'll have trouble reading. And they're going to get a headache because they're trying to focus and they can't focus, attention headache. It's not like the brain is increasing its injury. So, and I have a lot of patients coming to me saying, I get on the bike and I get a headache. Is that bad? And I'm saying, no, you're getting a headache. 90% of the public has headaches. It's not headache per se. So I think the main thing, which I'm going to try and emphasize here, is that you have to identify people that are at risk for getting injury. That's very important. And at risk for not doing well at school. Because if they can't pay attention, they're driving a car, they'll get in a car accident. If they're at school, they're taking that test that gets them in the next grade or into college, they're not going to do well. That's what you have to focus on, not the fact that the symptoms are producing some kind of injury. And we should take those people and say, okay, you can't focus very well, going to give you accommodation in school, give you a little bit more time, but you should exercise. Those are the kind of things that we promote at the center. And if you talk to the leading centers across the country, they're all pushing the same thing: early exercise. If you want to look at an iPad, go ahead. You're going to get a headache because you can't focus, but it's not going to do any harm. Now we get into what's the concussion? How do you define it, right? So somebody who has attention and balance problems and doesn't get resolved. I mean, here at Stanford, if I have an athlete that takes 2 months to get better, and it's their third or second concussion or third concussion or fourth concussion, I'm going to tell them the next time you get another concussion or head injury, you're going to be out for 2 months. You're here at Stanford to study. Sports is nice, but it's the studying that's number one. So in those people, I advise them to not play contact sports and concentrate on recovering. So, the long-term effects of somebody who doesn't recover from concussion are understudied. I think that if you have a concussion or traumatic brain injury and your attention doesn't come back to normal and you have problems with your attention, I do think that predisposes you to long-term dementia. I think that's probably looking at that. The question is, we need to do more longitudinal study of people that haven't recovered from a head injury, have trouble paying attention. Because if you can't pay attention, attention is your window on the world. If you can't pay attention, you can't process information. And what will happen, the processors in the brain will degenerate. It's just the way the brain works. Use it or lose it. So I think that looking at attention, I'll talk more about it, what attention is, what you're doing in paying attention, and how that's affected in concussion. And people who don't recover are probably at a higher risk for developing dementia long term. I'll show you actual measurements. So people are getting away from symptoms. Symptoms are very nonspecific. So having, the leading cause of seeing a neurologist for any condition is headache and dizziness. And those are the top two symptoms in concussion. So they're very nonspecific. You can get headaches and dizziness from lots of things. So we're moving away from that and really measuring attention and balance are the two big ones. So you have to have metrics on attention and balance. And if they're off and they don't recover, then then I get MRIs in people. We look for shearing injury. We do neuropsychological testing and so on. And we put the whole package together and then we make an assessment at that point. So CTE was discovered in boxers originally, and then famous film Concussion. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it with Omalu and the Boston group, defining this condition as repetitive head injury or repetitive subconcussive injury correlates with this. So it's a pathological diagnosis. You have to be, it's autopsy material. There are some MRI, PET studies now, positron emission tomography, which is sort of imaging, and you can see the protein that's laid down here in living people. So that's developing. We'll see how that goes, but there may be a possibility of seeing this. But the interesting part is it starts in the front part of the brain where the attention is. So if your attention's out, you get this kind of progression that occurs. Now the progression's not proven. It's sort of nice to think it starts here and then it progresses over here. But so far we found people like this and like this, but we haven't because you only found an autopsy, you don't know if it progresses or not. I think with being able to do imaging in living people and seeing progression will support this more. Okay, let's talk about mechanism, because I think this is really important. The neck is producing the concussion. So you can get focal brain injury. So if the neck is an iron rod, and I hit over here, this part of the brain will be damaged. If you get a hammer and you slam in here, right underneath, it'll be damaged. I think a lot of people think that if you fall on the back of your head, let's suppose you're standing, fall backwards, you hit the back of your head, this part of the brain is damaged. I'll tell you that the number of times I've operated to take a clot out back here is close to zero. And all the time. Every neurosurgeon you talk to, where's all the damage occurring in traumatic brain injury? It's all in the front. It's all up here, because this part moves the most around the neck. It's farthest away from the neck fulcrum. So it has the greatest shear forces. So that's where all the injury is. It's right up here, and it's caused by the neck whipping around the brain. So, and you don't have to have a direct head hit. This one's somebody getting hit in the chest, and the head's whipping around. And you can see it's right here. The neck is producing this whiplash back and forth. So there's some evidence that having a thick neck prevents concussions. I would say, like in women and young children, they have a lot of flexibility. If you look at women, they actually can move their necks a lot more to the side and to the front than men can. And that actually can produce more of a whiplash in the brain. So I think part of the reason why you see higher rates of concussions in women is because they have more flexibility in the neck. And in young kids, it's the same thing. So, the NASCAR people had a big problem with this with Dale Earnhardt Sr., and they came up with a HANDS device, which sort of locks the neck in. And NASCAR and Formula One say that the number of brain injuries has dropped dramatically since they had this device. So the problem is you can't move your head. And then you have Dale Earnhardt Jr. had a concussion, so you still get some concussions, but it definitely reduces the number of concussions. This is something that now the Army is working on, is a series of tethers that go back here. This is the newest version. Army Lab has this special materials that allows you to move your head, or your neck at low speeds, but when it goes too fast, it checks it like a seatbelt. And I think this is going to be the solution. This is going to dramatically reduce concussions. You need something that gives the neck more support and reduces the whiplash of the brain. Helmets are good for skull fractures and scalp injuries. They will not prevent concussions. So all the thing you see about this helmet having this kind of padding and that kind of padding, you don't need it. All you need is a little thin polyethylene cap to prevent skull fractures, and the rest of it's all in the neck. So I think in the next 10 years, you'll see a dramatic evolution of helmets and neck devices to prevent concussions. This is the way to go. So I think NFL is going to start putting a lot of money into this, in this kind of technology. The question is, what's the acceleration? What kind of dampening do you do and all that? That's an interesting part. Some of the new things that are happening, accelerometers. So these things are stuck on the scalp, and we can see in players what kind of forces they get. Technology still has to evolve. The mouth guards actually are better, mouth guards with accelerometers, because they're fixed to the upper jaw, and so you can really get a more accurate head movement. And eventually we can select players out that get exposed to high velocity impacts and test them on the sidelines. Blood biomarkers is another one. Taking blood, the way your brain gets banged up, it releases proteins. And these proteins go in the blood, and then you look at the blood and you can see the proteins. So this is another technology that's evolving. I don't think it's going to be on the sidelines. I think it'll be in clinics. And people that take a long time to recover. Some of these proteins are released weeks after the head injury. So it's actually a very interesting area. A lot of big drug companies are involved in this work right now. Imaging, the MRI is the way to go to pick up concussions. 3 Tesla MRIs, and looking at diffusion tensor imaging, which is a way of looking at the connections in the brain. Most of the injuries are in the front. This shows a white matter lesion in the right frontal white matter area, connections. Here just shows the connections in different parts of the brains. The problem is that 90% of people with concussions have normal imaging. And so imaging is not the best way to try and fine tune. Eventually imaging will get better and better, but it still lags behind what we have. There's obviously a small amount of swelling going on in the brain that we're not picking up in imaging. So let's get a definition. Multiple definitions out there. There used to be loss of consciousness, which is great because somebody passed out. You said, that's a concussion. And so it's pretty, you could observe it and measure it, and it was pretty good. But then we dropped that, and now it's basically anybody with a symptom after a force to the head. So I would say about 40% of the people coming to clinic or I see with a headache after head injury are actually normal. And the problem with that is that now you have all these diagnostic devices and therapeutic devices trying to influence a group that 40% are normal. You're not going to see efficacy. And it's a big problem in testing new devices and therapeutics So we need to do a better job at definition. So we did this at Stanford. We came out with the Concussion Guidelines. Step one, what's prevalent after a force to the head? We went over 5,000 research articles. We came up with this general definition, which has been accepted by the NCAA. So a concussion is a change in brain function. That's very nice, but what is it? Following a force to the head, you may have a loss of consciousness, but then you wake up, and it's with measures of neurological cognitive dysfunction, not symptoms. We're trying to get away from symptoms. So the NCAA has picked this up and is using that now. The diagnosis is going to be coming from establishing there was a force to the head and then measuring some change in brain function. So accelerometers, biomarkers, and imaging that I just went over, they establish you had an injury. And then we have to measure change in brain function. I'm going to be talking about eye tracking and vestibular testing. This is what we concentrate on. But there's other technologies as well. So this is the articles. We went over 5,000 articles. And the things that came up were attention and balance were the two main neurological functions that are impaired after a concussion. Attention and balance. And when you think about it, it's about orientation. So attention is orienting to the outside world that's moving. And then vestibular balance is you're moving and you're trying to keep track of the outside world. That's what it's all about in a simple way. It's about orientation. So concussion is actually an acute disorientation. And that's what you see in the players. They come out confused, in a fog, in a daze. And many people are actually walking around mildly disoriented. And I think we have to have better measures of that. So, and this just shows you that most people recover within a week. Here are the top symptoms: headache, dizziness, and blurred vision from people who have a concussion. And the way we account for a lot of these symptoms are that it's an attention problem. So you have decreased concentration, memory difficulties. If you can't pay attention, you can't put things in the memory, you can't pull them out of memory, decreased processing speed. And then because you're trying to pay attention and you can't, you have headache, fatigue, sleep disturbances, and so on. So it explains a lot of the symptoms. I'm going to test you on this afterwards, so memorize it. I love showing this to students. This is going to be on your test. So one of the things we're working on is called a dynamic model for concussion. What's everything involved? It's one of the main questions we ask people who come in with headache after a head injury. Does your mother have migraines? Usually the mother's side of the family, or father. And those people are very prone to have prolonged headaches or atypical headaches after a head injury. So I like to call those concussion trigger disorders. So the thing is that the head injury is triggering what they had from before, which is migraines, and they get a lot worse, so they get a little bit different, and they continue on, and those people take a long time to recover. Also, people with a history of depression, anxiety, the head injury can trigger the depression, especially if they've been exercising as a strategy to compensate for the depression, anxiety, then they're told not to exercise, and it really comes out a lot. So those are things where they have a pre-existing condition. So migraine, I'll get to the subtypes. Migraine is a big area of focus, and what I do is I specifically focus on the headache, not as a concussion headache, but as a migraine headache, and have them deal with that. When they solve that problem, then usually they go away. Yeah, I'll get into some of the eye tracking stuff we're showing, which shows disinhibition. So what happens in concussion, the brakes are in the front part of the brain, that's what gets shook up. And so a lot of these kids become disinhibited, so they become angry easily, they're cranky, they're sleep problems on top of it, they can't focus, they have judgment issues and so on. And you can see it in some of the eye tracking, which I'll get to in a minute.
Now, I had understood that a second concussion, especially early on after the initial concussion, would be much more important than later on, 6 months or a year later.
Right.
If somebody has a concussion a year or two later, how serious is that?
I think if the way I treat it is if they recovered fully, I treat it like as a new concussion. What I'm more interested in is how fast they recover, especially if they're a student, they're taking too long to recover, then I will tell them not to play contact sports. That's the way I look at it. So if somebody had a concussion, the athletes here, I'll show you, they improve in like 3 days, they get back to normal. So they're very quick. Occasionally I get 1 out of 20 or 30 who takes a long time to recover. Usually those people have multiple concussions before. They're taking longer and longer to recover. At that point, some point, When it gets to about a month for recovery, I say, you're a student here, you shouldn't be playing contact sports. That's the way I look at it. I'm looking at a very practical point of view in terms of who is vulnerable getting injured again and what we should do, and also they're in school. But I'll get to that in a minute. So here's, again, the migraine here. This is what's going to be in the future in terms of definition. We're going to do subtypes. Nobody's going to come up with concussion definition that takes the whole thing. So there are subtypes within concussion that we're going to start defining. We're starting this work now. And this we're going to be working with a Pittsburgh group, Mickey Collins. They have this test called the impact test. A lot of schools use it for baseline. So everyone's moving to this ocular vestibular diagnosis, which seems very prominent. The reason why we're focusing on this is because people who have ocular vestibular problems are at risk for getting another injury. They can't pay attention, they have coordination problems, and so focus on this is very important. The other ones, like migraine, anxiety, mood disorders, cognitive fatigue, are usually people have a history of depression, anxiety, or migraine. It's just triggered. So this is what we see in the clinic. We see parts of these things popping up where people have these problems, but not. Some people have normal vestibular ocular, but they have migraine, or they have anxiety, depression, but all their other tests are normal. And so we're going to start dividing, we're going to start getting rid of the concussion, you have a concussion, and to say you have a concussion subtype, ocular vestibular, you score poor on these tests, and here's your therapy. Very directed. That's where it's going. And at the end of the day, it's all about orientation, which I'll get into. So this is the way that I constructed it, that a lot of people are using now. Concussion disorientation disorder, ocular vestibular, cervical, these are all have to do with the brain orienting to time and space. And then these are triggers. So you had a previous history of migraine, now it's worse. Previous history of anxiety, depression, it's worse, or cognitive fatigue. The concussion is triggering these problems. So what do we do in the sidelines? This is the old way of doing it. Put your finger back and forth and see if they can follow your finger. We're doing a lot more quantitative eye tracking. This is iSync, the one we're using at Stanford. Another test we use at Stanford is VOMS, which we have the person move their head back and forth very rapidly and see if we produce dizziness or headache. Another one's a King-Devick test where you read cards and they time them. These are all eye movement type tests. And what we want to do is keep them quantitative. So on the sidelines of Stanford games, somebody's suspected to have a concussion, we take them, we do this eye tracking. It's a 30-second test with virtual reality goggles with eye trackers built in. I'll show you what it is in a minute. We do that. If they're positive, then we do these other testing. SCAT3 is a test used very commonly on the sidelines. We do all three. So here's a concussion phone that nobody can hear when it rings, but anyway. But we had this the first game last year, and nobody heard it. So now they have they do it with, they have little phones inside your ear. The spotters, every one of these games. So Pac-12, all the games, they have spotters who are videotaping the games, and they can suspect a concussion. They call down, they pull the player out. NFL does the same thing. Pulls the player out, and they try to assess them on the sideline. So the eye tracking takes 30 seconds. I mean, if you want to go through a big test, get 30 minutes, and that's the end of the player's not going to be in the game anymore. So last year at Stanford, they used this, and they cleared a lot of people who they thought had a concussion, but it turned out they didn't. And I do think they got in the Rose Bowl because of that, but I won't claim otherwise. If they took out some of the players, they would not have been in the Rose Bowl. So let's go into what's the biology of this. A lot of people are sort of look at the brain as kind of the liver, right? So you hit it and the function goes down. It's more sophisticated than that. There are a lot of connections in the brain, and what's happening here, and I just show vision, because 90% of what we do in terms of attention is visual. And you can apply the same thing to hearing as well. But what happens is in the brain is, this is the prefrontal cortex is I want to do something. I want to play tennis, I want to listen to somebody. And the parietal lobe here and the cerebellum tell you where and when that information is coming in. You have to synchronize the information coming in with what you want to do with it. You want to think about it, you want to play tennis, you want to play football, you want to catch a ball. There's information, sensory information coming in that you have to synchronize with the motor function. And that synchronization is very exquisite. And what a concussion does, it disrupts that synchronization so you feel out of it. You're out of sync, and I'll get more into that. So the tennis analogy is this, and by the time this player, we know, sees that ball, it's over there. He's got to swing his racket before the ball gets there so he can interact with it. So just think about this as your ear, and this is a word coming. So sometimes you're expecting a word, right? Because yeah, it's what happens. You're playing tennis, right? You're expecting the ball there, right? The word didn't come. So that you don't realize, you're just doing this unconsciously all the time. You're synchronizing with the outside world constantly, and you're doing a really good job about it. So because the brain is delay in processing, you've got to swing that racket. This is the horizon of interaction. This is what you're doing all the time. Listening to people, looking at things, driving your car. You're synchronizing the sensory input with the motor. This motor is playing tennis, but it can be thinking as well. So you need to have spatial and temporal prediction to be able to do that. And these are the areas involved. The cerebellum is involved in timing. It tells you when things are going to happen. And the parietal lobe tells you where it is. And that's where you synchronize motor and cognition. It turns out the output of cerebellum, half of it goes to motor pathways and half of it goes to cognition. So it's really coordinating sensory motor function. And this is just, if you look at the output of this is if you don't do a good job synchronizing, you end up with jitter or variance. So here's variance, very variable. It's like a 5-year-old. We know 5-year-olds are very reactive. And then as you get into 20-year-olds, they get very good. They get the reactivity goes down. I want to jump into eye movements quickly. Okay, so what do we do with the eye tracking? The eye tracking is a dot going around a circle. It's just like a tennis ball. The eyeballs have got to move exactly with it. And we can see with the cameras in the eye exactly where the eye position is. So we can figure out the eye position of the target, and we can calculate how well you synchronize. That's a 30-second test. This is the device you use. It's FDA approved. We use this on the sidelines. Actually, now VR is going to be pretty prevalent. Everyone says it's going to be prevalent tomorrow. I think Christmas is when it's going to happen. So, but right now, there's no eye trackers in here. They just have, you move your head to get a scene change. Eventually, you're going to put eye trackers in because we don't do that. Normally, you move your eyes and the scene changes. So once they do that, the price will be a lot lower. So here's what happens when we get a report. Here's a normal person, left eye, right eye, and you can see the person's following the target really well. But here's somebody with a concussion. Look, you can see right away, you don't need numbers on this. But what happens is the person jumps ahead to where the target is going to be. So it's like you're playing tennis, and the person's swinging their racket before the ball's there. That's the way the brain works. You want to go 60 miles an hour. The way the brain works is it presses down all the way on the gas, goes 120, and uses the brake to go 60 miles an hour. That's why the brain weighs 2% of the body, but takes 20% of the energy. And that brake is an inhibitory control, controls your behavior. So somebody was asking about their son being disinhibited. What happens is the brakes are in the front part of the brain. When you get this whiplash, the brakes are damaged, and you jump ahead into the future. So actually, your brain you don't know about it, but your brain is actually 2.5 seconds in the future all the time. And the way you end up in real time is by breaking it, so you're now. This is sort of gets into consciousness and things like that. So what we're seeing here in the eye tracking is real time. And what happens is this person recovers, it goes back to this. We also can see sleep deprivation. This jitter in this direction is sleep deprivation. So let me just quickly show what it looks like. So this is just so this is a normal person following the dot. This is the right eye and left eye. It shows the eye positions. And you can see that both eyes are following the dot really well. Okay, this is a normal person. They've got good synchronization. There's the dot, there's the eye movements. Now here's somebody with a concussion. Watch this. See that? They're jumping ahead to where the target's going to be. The eyes are jumping ahead. The target, it's not there yet. And these are other things. And then we get some people, here are the athletes, they recover like within 3 days very quickly. Here's other people who take a long time to recover. So we can see that in the eye movements.
Does that change with age?
It develops, so eye tracking develops in kids, it matures in late teens, so we can see development, attention development in kids. In older people, it can still be maintained. Some older people don't have good eye tracking, but other people have really good eye tracking. So
We mentioned the recovery. Athletes recover in 3 days. What about older people? Do they recover?
Yeah, so the athletes I see on the sideline, I see them immediately. The people who come to my clinic are coming to me because they haven't recovered, so it's a different crowd. I'm getting selected people who haven't recovered, and they usually take a longer time to recover. If I was able to be in the emergency room and test everyone as soon as they came in, I'd probably see the same things. Most people we know recover within a week, but there are about 10% who take longer to recover. Here's 100 soldiers we sleep deprived because the military is worried, IED goes off or somebody gets injured and they're sleep deprived. Does the eye tracking look bad? It's there as well. So here's 6 o'clock in the evening, good eye tracking. And then when we sleep deprive them, what happens is they get fuzzy in this direction. They don't get what we see in concussion, which is big forward jumps. So we can actually tell people who are sleep deprived and who have a concussion. And actually, the people with concussion are sleep deprived as well. See how big this is in this direction? Then they also have this. So it correlates with MRI. Here's Stanford athletes, normals. They have really good eye tracking. The military is pretty close. And then civilians are pretty good as well in terms of eye tracking. So we're doing a big study now. We're just finishing up a 10,000 person study of eye tracking. We've got 30 schools in New York and 30 schools around Palo Alto, including Stanford. We're also doing on the sidelines eye tracking with USC, UC Santa Barbara, not Berkeley, Utah, Oregon State, and about half the Pac-12 schools. We also got a contract from NCAA and Pac-12 to do all the concussion studies in the Pac-12 schools. So we're just starting that up here at the Concussion Center. Yeah, there's a question.
Do you have any data on how well those eye tracking measurements correlate with the reported symptoms that the...
Yeah, the issue is you're getting people in who have symptoms, and we have, I would say about 60% of the people who come in just with a headache have eye tracking problems, and the Pittsburgh group has picked this up as well. So ocular vestibular accounts for about 60% of people with headache. The other 40% have headaches, usually from other things, migraine, depression, anxiety, tension headaches, those kinds of things. So the real way to do it is what we're doing on the sidelines now. We're testing everybody and the whole group of people and seeing what percentage have symptoms and which don't. How's the eye tracking correlate with that? Did you have another question? Yeah.
The tools that we have in the office are not what you have, so we have symptoms.
Right.
So if there's any...
No, we can do the VOMS test you can do in the office. So that's just having your thumb out and have the person shake your head up and down. And if you look up VOMS, and the Pittsburgh group has really pushed this a lot. So you have a symptom list just with those tests. And then you have the moving this way and that way. So you're basically looking at how well they orient with them moving or the outside world moving, and you look at symptoms. And you can grade it on that basis. If you haven't got the technology, you can use that. It's just as good. So yeah, that's the Concussion Center. And what we do is we do the eye tracking, we do neurological examination, we do vestibular balance. This is very important. Besides the eye tracking, you need vestibular balance, and then we do neuropsych testing. And the main thing we're pushing is early exercise. So here's a study in kids showing that early exercise actually promotes recovery. And what we do is cardio exercise, you push that right away, and sleep. This is brain health, by the way. Everybody should be doing this. I mean, you want to prevent dementia and feel resilient and feel good all day long. It's cardio exercise and sleep, but REM sleep. It's not just 10 hours of sleep with Ambien or Sonata or something. It's, you need to have this deep REM sleep. Okay, yeah, question?
You talk about a lot about athletes in Stanford and the sidelines. I'm wondering if there's a difference between how you guys are aware of varsity athletes. My son is a club sport here at Stanford, and maybe the monitoring is not as much. You guys aren't aware of it. Does he need to more self-report it because he's not getting the same level of attention that, obviously there's a lot of varsity sports, so I understand.
Yeah, we actually, that's a really good point, and the Concussion Center would like to reach out to the non-varsity sports like rugby and other sports that are going on, and we're trying to work with Vaden on that. We don't have the manpower really to extend ourselves out there. We'd like to support of the alumni is always appreciated. So, we'd like to reach out to Vaden and the other students and really get them organized in the same protocols that we have for the for the varsity athletes. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm an osteopathic physician who's been treating concussions for almost 40 years using cranial osteopathy. And what I've found repeatedly in these mild traumatic brain injuries, I'm clearly not a surgeon, is the dural membranes have slightly twisted, and the brain is slightly twisted, which stops the cleaning of the brain, which is so important after trauma. It stops the CSF flow, it stops the venous drainage. And one of the things we do is open up the channels so that you have the drainage, they don't have the continuous toxic poisoning. And what's amazing is I can teach almost anyone in an hour how to feel the pulsations in the brain and the dural pulse. So I'm hoping that eventually in your center, I mean, there are not a lot of us, so, you know, I have people fly all across the country to see me, but, you know, there are not a lot of us, but, you know, we are very effective at treating some of these slow resolving concussions. Certainly if they need surgery, that's not my ball game.
Yeah, I mean, and also there's, I think physical therapists are a very important part of the team in terms of treatment. And also there's a lot of other technologies looking at brain swelling, things like that, pulsatility and so on. So future areas. I think right now it's so nebulous, the condition, that we're not focusing on different things. Obviously people have different problems and we need to figure out what those are and have the right treatments for them. Yeah.
So you mentioned a while ago, I think you said essentially it's easier for women to get concussions due to their neck muscles aren't as strong and maybe other things. So is there a difference in symptoms, how you would treat concussions by gender, or is it just the incidence is higher for women and otherwise it would be similar?
So, you know, we have found, the eye tracking, we've done so many people, we've actually found a gender effect. So women have different eye tracking norms than men do. And I think that right now, in terms of diagnosis and treatment, it's the same for men and women. I think in the future, they'll probably end up with a lot of more cervical neck problems than men do because they have more of a whiplash. And the neck is really important because the neck has receptors and they can get torn, and I'm sure that you've seen that. So they get torn, they send the wrong signal to the brain, so you're going like this and it doesn't send the right signals, and your eyes go over here and everything's blurry. So it's a very important part, and I think the more we realize the neck is producing the concussion, the more we'll have specific treatments aimed at that. Yeah.
So I understand that the focus of a lot of the work is on close monitoring of athletes, and as you also indicated, people in, you know, traumatic car injuries and things. I guess I wonder, given the nebulous definition of concussion and the number of just household injuries and things that occur not just with kids but with adults as well, and it, you know, sort of what are the public health implications of that in terms of when do you even advise someone to come in and consider that they might need to be evaluated for concussion, because it seems almost an enormous problem that it's a little hard to kind of focus in on what's enough injury to warrant a concern.
Well, I'll give you something that's even more concerning. So you know, a lot of schools have baseline testing to sort of compare the photograph of the kid before the injury and then after the injury. And they're really for tests because they're not specific. You know, I mean, so a lot of the neurocognitive testing, like impact, you need it before and after. The eye tracking, you don't need it because it just shows disorientation. But we're doing a baseline eye tracking, not only at Stanford, but a lot of the other schools. And I'm finding about 10%, and also we have some NFL teams too, about 5 to 10% of the athletes have abnormal signal. They're disoriented, and about half of them don't have concussions. So if I went to the, and our norms, you know, we did 10,000 people, about 5-10%, there's this 5-10% number keep on coming up, that people are just disoriented. And I think that just for a normal baseline, we should, because orientation is very important. If you're not oriented or paying attention, you have a lot of problems. You're at risk for lots of injuries, driving injuries, falling injuries, and so on. And with the elderly, it's not only balance that's important, but it's your attention. So you know, a lot of the experiments with cognitive assessment in the elderly is they put them on a treadmill, just walking, and they have them chewing gum or doing something else at the same time, and they fall off. So, you know, these are kind of tests, I think, that eventually, just like taking your blood pressure or seeing what your cholesterol level is, neurology needs to move into the public domain and saying, How well oriented are you? How good is your attention? How good is your balance? Those are really essential functions that if you don't have the wherewithal, you're going to be at risk for getting injury. Yeah.
First of all, just a great talk. That was excellent.
Thanks.
And very enjoyable. In terms of treating, you mentioned exercise and rest. Some people have advocated fish oil in terms of maybe preventing and then also treating.
Right.
And then even steroids, maybe like a Medrol dose pack for people.
Right. Yeah.
Advocating any of those?
Yeah, the steroid pack is kind of like a neurologist's favorite. I don't make fun of neurologists, but the steroid pack tends to be used for pain syndromes, where you give it and it rapidly decrease it. And some people it works, The fish oil, the jury's out. There's no. The problem with any of these therapeutic interventions is you haven't defined the condition. So how do you know the therapy works? So we need to like define, say, for instance, ocular vestibular type, and then look at those people's trajectories and the people that take a long time to recover, give them fish oil early on, versus a control group, and see if they improve quicker. We haven't done that study. So right now, fish oil, hyperbaric oxygen. There's a bunch of things out there that are hyperbaric oxygen actually had a clinical trial that failed. So, but again, I would say the jury's out in that too, because they just brought in concussion subjects, and I'm sure half of them were normal. So, when you compare that to the control group, you're not going to see a difference. So, it may work in a subset of people. Again, we're not going to see any efficacy in these treatments until we define the condition.
You suspect a football player has a concussion, take him on the sidelines, do the ocular tracking, and he's normal. Can he go back in then? And can you use the ocular tracking test long-term to determine when the player can go back?
Yeah, we do that right now. So if they have normal eye tracking and their balance is okay, we send them back in. So that's what we use it. It's a very quick screening test to make sure they're okay. If there's still some people who come out with a headache or whatever, if their eye tracking is normal, a lot of them have they have a neck whiplash or something like that, and they're okay to play. The neck, well, you have to be careful. Sometimes the neck can send weird signals, but if it's just a neck strain or something like that, or if I had a basketball player who got hit and got stitches and had a head injury, but eye tracking was perfectly normal, everything else is normal, we said you didn't have a concussion. So right now, he had a headache because he had a hit on his head. It's like Steph Curry when he went over, I think it was last year, jumped over and hit his head, and we tested him. Everything else was normal, but he had a scalp contusion. So we call it, instead of a concussion, we call it contusion. So a lot of people with head injury have a headache because it hurts. Their scalp is injured, but they don't have a brain injury. And I think also we got to be careful about calling concussion a brain injury. If I don't see an MRI or CT scan that's abnormal, I'm hesitant about calling it a brain injury. First of all, it inhibits a person's recovery. If you tell somebody you have a brain injury, it's like a stroke. It produces a lot of, and you don't have proof for it, why tell them? Until imaging gets really good and I can see that they have a brain injury, I'm not going to tell them they have a brain injury, because 90% plus improve. So why give them bad news if they're going to improve anyway? Yeah, if there's an abnormal eye tracking, we take them out and we test them. We do SCAT3, we do the VOMs, and they're out. We take them out, and then what happens is we put them on a treadmill the next day, do exercise, and we test them every day until they get back to normal.
You said you get them on the treadmill the next day as soon as possible. Why are they not allowed to get back in the classroom as soon as possible?
Oh, because they're not, at that point, their attention's off, right? So it's a good point you brought that up. So we have a protocol here where the classroom and the sports are both evaluated together. So if they can't pay attention, Stanford is notified, the classes or the professors are notified, and they give them accommodation, they give them more time to recover. So if they're not back, if their attention's not normal, the same thing happens in the classroom.
Can you describe briefly what's happening on the cellular or even the molecular level and what the prospects are for developing better biomarkers or imaging markers?
Yeah, so right now in terms of imaging, we need to focus more on what happens in the first 3 days, because that's where the maximal swelling occurs in the brain. And a lot of the imaging is occurring maybe too early or too late, and we're not picking up this little window. So I think that it's really going to be focused on axonal, which is the connections of neurons, axonal injury, prefrontal cortex. That area is where everything's happening. It's not the back of the brain. It's not, it's all in the front. And it's usually white matter. So and the other idea, when you see in the videos, you see the brain hitting the inside of the skull and the top part of the brain getting bruised. We don't see that. I mean, you see that occasionally, but most of the blood clots are deep. It's from shearing. And so it's white matter, it's prefrontal cortex, it's axons. Proteins that come off of that will be prognostic. You've got a lot of proteins coming off, and also inflammatory mediators. So people, I think, who have extended problems with headaches and concentration have a lot of inflammation. And so picking up those proteins is going to be very, very good. So I think the biomarker is going to be really good. I think accelerometer technology needs to get better too, because we need to know who to pick out from these sports about who's been exposed to a potential concussive force. Right now we have spotters. We have people like just looking down and saying, oh, he looks abnormal, but how do you know that person isn't? I mean, So accelerometer technology, biomarkers, and imaging are the three big areas I think we need developing. And then we can get down to nitty-gritty of the proteins, or what can we do? Neuroscience, the neuroscience area in terms of Alzheimer's, stroke, and all that. I don't know if you know about it, but there's not a lot of drugs that we can give. I mean, basically, a lot of them are just the stroke thing is clot busters. There's nothing in the brain that we're doing to actually improve outcome. So right now, a lot of pharmaceutical companies are pulling out of neuro because there've been a lot of failed drug trials. There've been 40 drug trials in traumatic brain injury. They've all failed. But the things that work are perfusion, keeping blood flow in the brain and so on. So I think for right now, we're sort of focused on keeping blood flow and oxygen in the brain, hydration, and promoting recovery. Now, what the molecular aspects of that are, we have to see. Paul Allen's just put in a $10 million RFP to Stanford and some other schools to look at basic mechanisms of concussion and recovery. And so I think right now I would focus on prevention and subtyping concussions so we can get good trials going, and then we can start focusing on the basic science.